Hi, folks. Welcome to Idio Talk, an Apple podcast, or when the pod hits the pod app, it plays like a king. What it says every ep when it goes on the cloud, and you'll hear the whole thing before you let your phone ring. There's no podcast that's better when you're tuned in tonight, so when you have headphones, you choose your own cast. And remember that Glens are the greatest of hosts, and if you listen too fast, then you'll miss all the jokes, but if you wait, it won't matter, because it's in your downloads. I am Walker Glenn.
And I'm Zach Glenn, and I'm a little worried. Did you snort some cocaine this morning?
I have had a lot of coffee. I was going to caution the listeners.
I didn't want to confront you on mic.
No, that's okay. Yeah, this whole podcast has been an intervention. And the first season, Zach was like, no, he'll see it coming still. I'm going to lay the groundwork for another year or so. We're going to do this intro
risk
in our
death.
Yeah, risk death. Look, hey, no, I have had a lot of coffee. I have not had any cocaine today.
Okay. All right. Uh-huh.
And I was going to caution listeners, you're probably, fumbling with your phone right now, going to your podcast app going, oh, I didn't mean to set this on 1.5 or 2 times speed. No, listeners, I just today, for I think the first time, did not have to just edit me finding the subtitle the long blank space. And so I was so excited that I had it pulled up this time that I was just like, I wonder how fast I can do this. So it's just a little challenge to myself.
Well, that's fantastic.
How are you, buddy?
Oh my gosh, I'm so great. And this can be on mic or off mic, but I was so excited to share with you the trailer for Furiosa. So this might be something that we cut out, but were you pumped?
Oh, I'm extremely pumped. And honestly, maybe we'll cut it out, maybe we won't, but in general, we usually don't get too topical because there's usually a lag between release and recording, but this time we're recording this thing not too long before it gets put out to the listeners. So that trailer's still pretty fresh. And I think it looks amazing. Anya Taylor-Joy is playing.
She's so good.
Is it Anya Joy Taylor or Anya Taylor-Joy?
Anya Taylor-Joy.
Okay. I really like her.
I do too.
I think she's terrific. And I think that's really great casting for a young Charlize. I like when movies bother to recast parts when doing a prequel or a much later sequel now, because, too often it's like, let's just do a 3D rendering of the person and make them unpleasant to look at the whole time. And so
right.
I love that George, what's his name? George Miller. George Miller is, this old man still making these crazy Mad Max movies. I can't wait to see it.
I love Chris Hemsworth playing against type.
Now, does he have a prosthetic nose or something? Is he the guy?
Yeah, you could tell he's wearing a little bit of a prosthetic and his teeth look weird. And even in that one shot too, I love that his cape, you see a shot of him kind of driving like in frame with a lot of other cars, and you could see that it's a cape that's covered in blood. But then in the other shots, it just looks like a pure red cape. So it almost looks like it's like a wink and a nod to his character as Thor.
I thought
which
that
I just
too.
love. I love it. I mean, I love that the movie is like, it's not like I've been reading so much about the first one and its production and then what little is available this one. And he has said something like, people that are looking for a sequelization to Mad Max Fury Road, like make sure that expectation is not there, or, do your best or whatever, however he says it. Very polite guy. But I like that on the trailer, there's like certain beats that like match like the original trailer. Cause I've seen the original trailer literally over 1,000 times. And I've seen Mad Max Fury Road probably 50 times. It's like one of my all-time favorite movies. And like, but I like though that it's like hitting certain beats, but like also there's just like completely visually new stuff too. And I'm just so excited. I just think it looks so cool.
Zach, I mean, it's not all good news, is it?
Can't be. It can't be. Not in America these days, Walker.
No, not in America these days. Not not with these Bidenomics going on. Just kidding. Our listeners are probably still in mourning at the time of hearing this. They've had, I guess, about 9 days to process their grief by the time they're listening to this. So where do you think that would put them in the DABDA at this point? Denial? He isn't dead.
I know, but
poke him with a stick. He'll come back. Of course, I'm talking about the late, great statesman, Henry Kissinger, whom this episode is dedicated to.
I hope nobody's in denial. Was it he went 99 or 100 years old?
He was 100. He made it to 100.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. 1 year for each 3,000 or 30,000 or 300,000 of his victims, depending on your count. No, I was actually just thinking, Zach, of Kissinger because I was like, you and I
Wait. Sorry. Former Secretary of State.
Former Secretary of State, before that, National Security Advisor to Nixon.
Thank you.
Mass murderer, war criminal.
Yes.
Just generally repugnant, malignant, evil force on the world, I would say.
Yeah, read any book about the dark side, the darker periods in American history, and you'll see his name come up with quite a bit of abundance.
Yeah, before that, who became... Yeah, oh, very much so. Who became kind of like the guy who keeps popping into everything I was interested in reading in like early to mid 20th century American history.
Hoover?
Hoover, yes. Hoover, but Hoover actually kind of was not a literal successor, but I think kind of took the mantle from this guy, though. In Rush Hour 2, when Chris Tucker says, "Follow the rich white man," which I literally said to Ollie the other day. I don't remember what he was asking me about, some political thing of like, what? I don't even remember what it was, but he's like, why are they doing this? And I was like, well, remember what Chris Tucker said, follow the rich white man.
And he's talking about Stephen Rang, who literally looks like a politician so much in that movie.
Very much so. No, the kind of like cancer man, if you want to use an X-Files metaphor, who kept popping up, is Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA.
Yeah. Before it. No, sorry. That was the CIA. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. And so Hoover, different agency or whatever, but I think definitely took the mantle of, spying on Americans and doing a bunch of illegal stuff with zero oversight and endless resources to do it. But yeah, that guy just kept popping up and up and up, and kind of every crazy thing that America did over like a 40-year period. It was like, oh, there he is again. And it's like, that's somebody whose name I did not know a few years ago, I feel like they're probably the smartest people in terms of like smartest perpetrators of, I don't know, evil foreign and domestic policy are the ones who we don't even really like talk about that much.
Yeah, like McCarthyism is like a phrase and stuff, but I don't know that like I really learned about what that is and like, until much, certainly and not until my late 20s, I would say, embarrassingly, if I could admit that. I don't know.
Sure. Well, I think that's pretty common for people. I think that we don't really focus on the dark side of American history too much. But Zach, I was thinking that this is kind of a fitting tribute to Kissinger, this podcast, because
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. This is what he would want, obviously. And I think that you and I are we're kind of a Nixon and Kissinger like pair in that those two paranoid psychopaths were constantly recording the other person.
I know Nixon wanted himself recorded, of all fucking people.
I know. we're going to want a record of all my crimes.
Everyone's like, are you sure, dude?
Yeah.
Do you really want the recorder right now?
Right.
Yes.
And so he's recording Kissinger, then Kissinger's recording him. Everybody's just like, I mean, it's like the it's like the like last act of Goodfellas, just like all the time, just everybody fucking each other over at all times. But Zach, that's kind of you and me. We record 100% of our conversations, and unlike Nixon, we are not crooks. We do not have anything to hide, and we put it out in podcast form, unedited. Every word that is exchanged between us. Who do you think is who in our duo?
I don't know. Yeah, why don't you tell me?
I think that you're Kissinger.
Okay.
And I'm Nixon. I'm like more front facing, but you're the one actually like sabotaging the peace talks in Paris to keep the Vietnam War going so that I can win re-election. And when I am finally taken down for my many crimes, you will just
stand
have
victorious.
you will stand victorious, have a new job on a different podcast, and even though you have caused just untold misery around the world, when you die, Hillary Clinton will like praise your diplomacy.
Yeah. No, now I gotta tell you, I think I may have told you off pod, but I recently reread. Oh, I know I told you. Reread Watchmen for probably the, I don't know, third or fourth time. And listeners will remember, throughout the majority of the story of the graphic novel Watchmen, Richard Nixon is still the president. They've somehow, because
it's in the 80s.
Yeah, so they've done away with term limits. But I know by the end of it, this is something that Alan Moore is so clever, and maybe Dave Gibbons too, but Alan Moore is so clever. The Nixon successor is somebody with the initials RR, but it's not Ronald Reagan, is it, Walker?
I don't remember who it is.
It's Robert Redford.
Oh, wow. Gosh, I don't remember that detail of the ending.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, it's only in there a little bit, but I just love that. But I was just, the reason I bring that up is just because it's fun, cool trivia. Listeners, please don't. I don't want to say it like this, but if you've ever kind of discounted the story of Watchmen based on the movie or the television show, or just that's for comic nerds, maybe there's some truth to that, but it's just such a profound examination of very relevant issues, as they were at the time, maybe through a different lens. I think that's the great thing about such great, enduring and insightful and profound art that looks at society is it endures, but maybe its endurance and parts of the message that, hit the reader or hit society at large, they might be at like different angles, even if, the thrust of the story is still relevant. Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Totally.
And I think what may stand out to people the most now might be like the fact that the glorification of superheroes and all that. And that was, of course, a huge thing in the 80s. But yeah, it's about so many different things. It asks so many great questions. And I don't think you have to make too much of a mental leap to have it speak to some of the same concepts or ideas that Fetch the Bolt Cutter speaks to, even though I know that we're not going to go from Watchmen to that. But I really want to recommend Watchmen. I mean, it was the third or fourth time I'd ever read it, and it really, really spoke to me in a different way this time, and I just adore it. So
I'd like to reread it again. I've read it a few times. I love that book. It's probably the best deconstruction of just the idea and concept of superheroes. And through examining superheroes, just the power structures more generally, I would say, and where good intentions are swallowed up by, or even like kind of like paternalistic forms of control that are supposedly for our own good, and the pitfalls of that, and
moral I would absolutism too.
Yeah, and I would say it's like kind of in terms of like the way that concept is presented in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I enjoy films from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but you know, the like really blatantly sometimes propagandistic nature of those characters as stand-ins for the military industrial complex or the police state. Often I would say it's very much kind of the anti MCU in terms of like the things that it's very smart because it's using, I think it's pretty subtle in how it does that with its superhero characters. And I know that's something that has been, I don't know if it was like the first, because I think that, well, I don't know. I don't know if I would say it's the first, but it seems to me that it's really influential in terms of its impact of us not taking like the heroism
would be like
right, or the Dark Knight Rises or something like that. The Dark Knight Returns, which is the first one. Returns is the first one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did Watchmen come before that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I just think it's been really influential in kind of bothering to examine these concepts that we take for granted of supermen and women, and you know, what sort of authority we cede to those we perceive to be great leaders and special, you know, more special than normal people.
Yeah. So good.
Zach, I've also been in a major Beatles mode right now. And, you know, that's never like
that
super
comes like
unusual.
every other year for me, I want to say at this point. I think it probably goes, I mean, I'm always listening to the Beatles, but I think I have it down to like every other year at this point.
That makes sense. Yeah, I just rewatched Get Back. And now I'm rewatching the Beatles anthology. And now I'm just like,
oh, really?
Yeah. And now I'm just like listening to, which speaking of Watchmen, rewatching the Beatles anthology, I'm like, I'm so glad Paul McCartney is so talented as a musician, because if he didn't do this man would be a politician, and he would be somebody who we would let get away with just like untold atrocities because of just like, he's very like Obama to me, where it's just like, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of forgetting to like pay attention to what you're doing because you are like so good at kind of like setting me at ease with the way you're talking. And the thing that made that stand out to me is in the anthology when they get to the thing of John Lennon saying that the Beatles are bigger than Jesus Christ. It shows John, you know, saying what he meant and making this kind of cynical point.
And makes, God, Walker, what is he, 23? He explains it in such an eloquent, mature way. Sorry, please continue.
Although I think he is backpedaling to an extent that he would not have to or choose to later in his career. I get it. I mean, I understand why he's like doing some damage control or whatever. But it's really funny because he's basically saying, you know, paraphrasing, he's like, I'm kind of pointing out how superficial this whole Beatlemania thing is. This is how I take his point anyway. I'm pointing out how superficial this whole Beatlemania thing is by saying we're bigger than Jesus Christ. What he's probably not saying is he's probably also making a point about the superficiality of religion as well. But he doesn't really say that. But, you know, he's like, I could have said TV is bigger than Jesus Christ, you know, or whatever. So he's like, and then it cuts to modern day Paul at the time, like, so like year 2000 Paul or late 90s Paul, whenever they did these
1995,
interviews. Oh, okay. The interviews for that were that old?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Mid-90s. Yeah.
So mid-90s Paul. And Paul goes, well, you know, what he was saying was it's just like, you know, the Beatles shouldn't be bigger than Jesus. You know, build Jesus up, you know, the Gospels and all that. And it's like, that's not what he was saying. And then it like cuts to John being like, that's not what I'm saying. And it really cracked me up because I'm just like, hey, I think enough time has gone by that you can like, you don't have to do damage control on the, like the Beatles won. Jesus 0, Beatles 1. Like you. And it cracked me up that he's like, that all this time later, he's like, I think he meant that like Jesus is good and great and praise the Lord, you know. And then when it cuts to John explaining it, I
love that moment. It's so badass.
Oh, it's great. It's great. It's such an iconic moment. I mean, it's one of those moments where ultimately it's just another like aggrandizing and mythologizing moment for their career, you know, because it's like people know it. But it cracked me up because it's like when John is getting asked about it and they're all sitting there, Paul is so uncomfortable. And like John like makes a joke or whatever like during it, and Paul like gives like this super pained laugh and then goes back to like biting his thumbnail or whatever. And you could tell that he's just like,
I know the moment. Yeah.
And I was just watching it. I'm like, you could tell his inner monologue is like, God, why does he have to say this kind of shit? You know? And so it just really cracked me up. And I was really like, if this guy was not in the Beatles, he would have been like the prime minister of England. Like, you know, we're gonna do a surgical response, aren't we? You know, minimize civilian deaths, you know, and we'd all just be like, oh, that sounds good, Paul.
Yeah, but like, there's a couple moments too during. I mean, the thing that like I know you and I off pod have talked about a lot, and you know, authors and Beatles historians and whatever talk about, but what I really feel is so impressive amongst the four of them, but specifically with John and Paul, is like, you know, you have these historical figures that aren't just limited to the Beatles. Obviously, like Cassius Clay, who then became Muhammad Ali, we would call him Muhammad Ali. But at the point when he was Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali, has these moments that are so impactful and are so brave and are so awesome, of him talking about, you know, racism in America and obviously the war in Vietnam and all of that. But, you know, along with him, like you have like, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as well, but you have like the Beatles, you know, at being asked about Vietnam and being asked about racism. And it's like their answers tend to be really simple to the extent where I'm just kind of like, that doesn't feel rehearsed. And that's kind of the beauty of it. And those are like the two things that are popping into my mind. Obviously, the Beatles were men. Obviously, they're fallible. Obviously, they're not perfect. But when, you know, I think there's a moment, I don't know if you're at the point in the anthology yet, where the Beatles are asked about something to do with race, you know, and it's just like a very simplistic, like, no. And you don't find that with a lot of famous historical figures that are still, you know, maybe alive today or, you know, just passed away. I don't know. Would you agree? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, what I'm trying to think of what the issue of the day they're asked to comment on might be.
Racism in America or the Vietnam War, you know? And
I guess I can't really, I guess I don't, maybe I haven't gotten to that part. I mean, I think that I think that Paul and John especially seem to have social, political positions that I tend to agree with or like identify as progressive for their time. I do think usually in their younger days when they're asked about stuff, it strikes me as people who are not really prepared to comment on those things or like super aware of them, in my opinion. But that's also okay. They're really young, you know, I didn't have a very strong awareness of those issues when I was 25 either. And thank God people weren't asking me to comment to the world. But I can't think of a moment in the kind of during the Beatles career, definitely post Beatles, especially for John Lennon. But I can't think of a moment where I'm like, wow, they nailed that necessarily.
Maybe, and I wish I would have had the moment prepared, but there is a couple moments I feel like where they're asked these really poignant questions where, to me, I'm like, when I was at that age, I don't think I would have had as eloquent an answer, you know.
For sure.
It does feel, and that's the thing that I love too, is that like a lot of the way they're answering is so casual because who could be prepared for that level of scrutiny and attention, let alone in your early 20s. I mean, we're sort of used to it now, and yet we see these people making the same mistakes over and over, and we don't examine as a society, hey, maybe the problem is giving a 17-year-old all the power in the world. Maybe that's the issue. And I'm not trying to get on a soapbox here, listeners. I know the Beatles weren't 17, but they were, up right around there, when they got. And yeah, I mean, it's really, really, it's inspiring to me. And like I say, it'd be a lot more maybe impactful if I had a shred of memory of the interview or the question. But yeah, there are just a lot of moments where I'm just kind of like, man, I don't think that is like the answer or the position that would have, won you. I mean, the Beatles had such a history within the 60s of answering things in a way that would cause uproar within middle America or, within the, fundamental Christian community. So, which were in our organizations and places that hold immense amount of power. So yeah, it's just really, really cool to me. I know not a fresh point or argument, but just
no, I mean, so cool. In Get Back, I think it's cool. You definitely see, I mean, especially again, Lennon, who's like known for his, leftism and political activism and stuff. You definitely see them. I think you see an increased awareness of of the things happening around them politically in Get Back. There's the origins of the song Get Back, where it's originally a protest song about a very familiar anti-immigration sentiment that is taking place in England. What was the name of the parliamentary member who he sounded like a very Trumpian figure that they're
I'm not sure
responding to? Errol something. Anyway, whatever. They're responding to a specific politician, and they're very like expressing opposition to the anti-immigration fervor that's going around. And then there's like a great scene where it's like they're all just sitting around smoking or whatever during rehearsal, and John's all lit up talking about watching MLK on TV the night before I think the I Have a Dream speech. I think, and he's just like going like, this man's amazing, and it's like, he's like a prophet, and then when they're jamming, he's throwing in lines from that speech into the what's that jam called that's on the album? The doon 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 doon, like the CIA, like a Rolling Stone.
I'm not sure.
Get Down. All that to say, yeah, I think you see it turning on. Now, in that same documentary, there's also a scene where they all, with no thought of the political or socioeconomic or racial implications, where they all very excitedly agree how it's great that they don't have to pay Billy Preston for being on the album, which I really, really like that the filmmakers kept in. I really appreciate, if we're going to get a bunch of new footage of them, I appreciate that it's not all in service of giving them perfect images. But that scene is pretty disturbing to me. It's like it's pretty bad. I don't think that they are consciously like, not paying him. I don't think they're not paying him because they're racist towards him because he's black or anything like that. But I do think it's a reminder of our blind spots, I guess, right? Because it's like they're all turned on by the movement for civil rights that's happening around them, but then they're also, reinforcing the hierarchy that already exists by going, oh, this guy's just so excited to be playing with the Beatles. We don't have to pay him. And there isn't one person in the room who goes like, hey, that's kind of fucked up.
Is the jam you're talking about I Me Mine?
No, so it shows them doing the whole, it's like a big long jam in the movie, but there's like maybe like 20 or 30 seconds of it edited into the end of one of the songs on Let It Be, the album.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I can't remember which song that is.
Okay, Zach, before we move on from the Beatles, though, I had a question for you, and this might be impossible to answer, but do you think you could name your favorite and least favorite Beatles song?
My favorite?
I know it's hard. But I know what my favorite is. Least favorite is harder, but
you know what your favorite is.
I do.
I
mean, and I have lots of favorites, but if there's
I have lots of favorites, but I would have to say if I had to choose a favorite, it would be The End from Abbey Road.
Really?
Well, is the end is da 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 do 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 do, and then everyone gets a solo.
Yeah,
that's my favorite because yeah. Love you, love. It's my favorite because everybody gets a moment.
Yeah, yeah. I love that.
And I mean, it's just it rocks so hard. I mean, it's like I think you can hear certainly the Beatles. I think you can hear the Rolling Stones. I think you can hear Led Zeppelin.
Sure.
In it, who had their debut album the year before. And I just, I mean, it's not actually my favorite because, I mean, it is. I just said it's my favorite. It's not my favorite, like if, but I choose it as my favorite sort of symbolically.
Yeah, I like that. It's like a spiritual favorite.
It's like a spiritual favorite, yeah, because it's like I knew, before I even knew how to like solo on a guitar, I knew whose part was who.
Yeah.
Like I knew what parts are Paul. I know what parts are George. The dirty parts are obviously John, and then Ringo gets a drum solo. And to me, it's just like we all have moments of us like air guitaring or rocking out or whatever that we would be mortified if anybody saw. But for me, why that song, it makes me want to cry. Why it's so beautiful is like I can imagine them all rocking out together. And they recorded that album in sequence. So that was the last time. And it's just, I don't know. It's just so cool. And they all crush it.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite.
John's solo.
It's so dirty.
That's,
and do you know that John gets the closing guitar lick too, which I think is so beautiful because John started the band. It was John's band.
Cool.
Even though it became Paul's band, it was always John's band, which I love.
I love it.
So
that's a great answer.
Why don't you tell me your favorite and then we'll go least favorites?
Okay. My favorite Beatles song is Strawberry Fields Forever.
Beautiful choice.
I think
that might be their greatest achievement. So
I mean, Paul used to be my favorite Beatle. John is my favorite Beatle.
Sure.
Love them both a lot. Love different things about both of them. These are not original insights. That's kind of how everyone feels, I think. But it's almost as if they had different strengths that complemented each other in an extremely amazing way. That's my take about the Beatles. But I do think like peak John for me is Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, and White Album. Mm-hmm. Is where and his just kind of like the way he like made like there's something about him where it's like even his most complex compositions, which he I feel like he, after that period, like doesn't bother with anymore. Like he's like pretty strictly like rock songs after that. And he's in a more experimental mode. I think that's way easier for Paul and way more natural for Paul, maybe that like spirit of experimentation. But
yeah.
John's peak achievements in that mode of the Beatles is like my favorite stuff any of them ever did. And Strawberry Fields Forever, you just hear everyone's influence on it so much. I feel like it's just a perfect song in its rudimentary form. And then it's like the coolest orchestration and composition of anything they ever did. When that horn sting comes in on those last two choruses.
That part?
No, Strawberry Fields. Ba-dun. Nothing is real. Ba-na, 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 and it's just so cool. That's my favorite.
I love what he's doing with his voice in that song so much too.
Yeah, that's also my favorite look. The mustache, round glasses, big sideburns era is my favorite.
Okay, least favorite. Oh, this is tough. I mean,
it's harder.
It's so funny. Well, it's so funny because it's like I consider Help and Rubber Soul to sort of be the turning point as far as like, oh, this is a new band. They're not just doing these blues standards. They're, this is like the band of the 1960s and possibly, the next 4 or 5 decades, if not forever. But so I don't even the stuff that I don't love off of Rubber Soul and Help. There's not really a song I don't love off Revolver. But like this more just like standardy stuff off of those, I don't really hold against them. But at Sergeant Pepper onward, I'm just kind of like, you guys are better than this. And weirdly, one of my least favorite songs that is like beautifully composed and arranged from Sergeant Pepper, I think might be my least favorite. And I feel so bad because our parents, I know, occasionally listen to this show, and I know both our mom and dad love this song, but it's She's Leaving Home.
She's Leaving Home sucks.
Is my least
honestly
my least favorite.
And
I love Honey Pie and Why Don't We Do It in the Road, which I know might sound like sycophantic or whatever. I don't turn them on all the time.
I think love Why Don't We Do It in the Road. That song rules.
I know. Well, yeah.
Paul
like turns me on when I listen to that song. But I mean, I don't like throw them on all the time. But She's Leaving Home, like, I love that. Is it a harp, that intro?
Yeah, that's a harp.
Like, that's awesome. But just the song drives me crazy and is so fucking cheesy.
I mean, Paul, when he is being, I don't hate that song. The thing is like, my least favorite Beatles song is still like, yeah, it's pretty good, but like, it's on Sergeant Pepper. So I'm saying compared to the rest of Sergeant Pepper, it kind of sucks.
Right.
I mean, overly sentimental Paul without kind of a hint of irony.
Baby's gone.
Yeah, that's my now there are things I like in that song. I like the backing vocals going bye bye bye.
Yeah, I love that.
But also just daddy, baby's gone. Like, it's just kind of like, all right, Jesus. Like that's a good pick.
Okay, good. All right. What about you?
Well, I think my least favorite Beatles song is also from Sergeant Pepper.
Oh, shit.
And I think I would have to go Within Without You. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
And that's George Harrison's sitar song.
Cool atmospheric stuff.
For me, that song I remember as a kid, these songs that I would grind the album because I had very low patience for like experimentation as a kid. So like I had a tape of the White Album that I would listen to all the time, and it would get to like Wild Honey Pie, and I'd be like, I'm like all mad and fast forwarding. And now I think it's cool that it's on there. Now, even as a 37-year-old man who is like still kind of exploring like every corner of this band of like kind of, ooh, what else can I get like a hit from? Yeah. That song still just grinds that album to a fucking halt.
Yeah.
And it does not help that it is followed with When I'm 64, which to me is another extremely weak contribution. And out of Paul's like what Lennon referred to as Paul's the show tune standards thing. Yeah, his granny music. I love Maxwell's Silver Hammer because it's weird.
Well, and Obladi is his granny shit too, according to
that one's cool too. But When I'm 64
Obladi
and Honey Pie to me are both just like they should have outvoted him on these ones. They're both lame. Like, it's just lame.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, so the sexual revolution is going on and this is what you're doing? Give me a break. Like, be cooler.
Well, he wrote When I'm 64 when he was like 17, which I always think is funny.
But Within Without You, I could not hum a bar of if you want. I like Love You Too, his sitar, George's sitar song on Revolver. But I Within Without You to me, and the thing is I'm not a George hater or anything, but my other like top choices for bottom song would be George. It is a pet peeve of mine when people say George is their favorite Beatle. I'm just like, well, these things are subjective, but you are incorrect.
Well, I think the thing to point to is, I mean, I don't think people that maybe would say George is their favorite would like say Tax Fan is their favorite song.
That song rocks, though.
That song rocks so hard, but who does the guitar solo on that song, Walker?
Paul.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, this little bit right here. And it's Indian. You know, George is really into the Indian bit, you know.
Yeah.
So it did kind of an Indian scale on it.
So I kind of just fucked off and did this thing he's super into better than him while not really caring about it at all, you know. And for some reason that annoyed him. For some reason that seemed to bother him.
Well, George would sometimes struggle to when Paul will reflect and like
edit himself in the middle of going, well, I was better. Yeah, no, to me, like, George being your favorite Beatle is like saying Ed is your favorite Radiohead. It's like, no, we honor Ed. We cherish Ed.
Ed is your favorite Radiohead.
Okay, wait, one more thing. Favorite George song, though.
Man, he's got some great stuff on Revolver. He's got some great stuff on Abbey Road. I don't know. Why don't you go first?
My favorite George song is Long, Long, Long off the White Album.
No, it's not. Really?
Yeah, it is.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I love that song. When it kicks in with that, you know, it's so quiet. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of an Elliott Smith song. It's so quiet, but when it kicks in with that, so many years I was searching. And also I like kind of just glossed over that song. It might be a little bit of recency bias because I glossed over it for years, but then like in the last decade, I'm just like, this is a hidden gem where I just, that's my favorite.
I agree. I love Long, 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 and I totally agree with glossing over it. I mean, I'm just kidding. It might be cliche. I'm going to have to go with While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Yeah.
It just does so many. I like it. Like, I'm tired of Here Comes the Sun, but Here Comes the Sun's a little bit cheesy for me. Something is a work of genius. But While My Guitar Gently Weeps is just, it has like, George has a very distinct style in the way he would do bends and just the way his slow hand style. You know, I mean, he was such a talented guitarist, but that song is just like wow, now, really, really slow style that would influence like David Gilmour, that would influence, you know, just these guitarists that I love so much. And and it has a key change in the chorus, you know, so it's like that's where I'm going to have to go for it. So
it's a great song.
My favorite George.
I was rocking out to it this morning. All right. Favorite Ringo song. Let's just do, okay. So
Octopus's Garden.
Yeah, easy. What's favorite? I feel like you have to say your favorite John and your favorite Paul because in the end is
okay.
And everyone. But my favorite John is I've given you my favorite John, George, and Ringo. So let's hear your favorite John and Paul, and then I'll give you my favorite Paul.
Oh, man, I'm gonna have to go with I'm the Walrus.
Ooh, I like that.
I love that song so fucking much. I love John, what he's doing with his vocals are so dirty, and I just love it so much.
LSD affected John the best creatively, I would say, out of all of them.
Yeah.
Like the you know, okay, favorite Paul?
Lady Madonna.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I thought so. I like that. Okay, my favorite Paul is Blackbird.
Really?
I don't know. It's just I feel like it's like,
I mean, it's too genius to exist on this planet. Basically.
It's one of those things where it's like if I wrote a song that good, I would immediately like walk into the ocean just because it's like this is what I need people to remember me by.
Can I tie? Even though I would prefer to listen to I Am the Walrus, I would also give Because from Abbey Road a tie.
Because that's a Paul?
No, because is what I think of as a John song.
Yeah, me too. Okay, gotcha. I'm sorry.
I would tie that with I Am the Walrus. But they're so different, and I would rather listen to I Am the Walrus like more. But that song is just, and I think of that more as a Beatles song definitively because it's a 17-part harmony. I think something like that. No, I'm serious.
Really?
They did their vocals that many times. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm gonna go with I'm the Walrus.
All right, I love it. You know who else was really into? Who is presumably really into John Lennon? I said that like in the joke structure of like the youth pastor voice. You know who else was a walrus? A little guy I like to call Jesus Christ. You know who else was bigger than Jesus? Jesus. You know who else loves John Lennon's music is Fiona Apple.
Mm-hmm.
We're back in Fiona land after a video talk episode.
Oh, yeah.
And Zach, it's a little sad. I think that maybe part of the stalling, we really like ran the gamut of just things to catch up on today, but we're at the last album for now.
Mm-hmm.
Not the last episode of the season. This is going to be a 2-parter, as we tend to do. We're going to give you a little bit of the background about the album and then listen to the tracks next week with a guest, actually. I'm excited about that.
I'm very excited.
But yeah, we're talking about Fetch the Bolt Cutters today. Fiona Apple's 5th album. Zach, can you kind of give us just the bare bones credits and information of Fetch the Bolt Cutters? Is this the most, other than The Smile, I think this is the most recent album we have covered. This is our second 2020 album that we have covered because also Anima was 2019. So other than The Smile, this is the most contemporary album we have covered on Idio Talk.
I mean, just 2 quick little anecdotes before I get started on the general data is I mentioned in our Anima episode, listeners go back and listen. That is the 2019 solo album, the 3rd solo album from Tom York, singer of Radiohead. I would say right off the top that I prefer this album. This one has had more of a longer lasting and meaningful impact. And I love Anima, so do with that what you will. But I said something to the effect of, Anima is prime for pandemic listening. I think that Fetch the Bolt Cutters, you could say the same for, and I think a lot of people would say the same for, including Walker, including myself, including Dave Grohl, including, writers of Rolling Stone, Spin Magazine. Like this album just hit at such a great time. Air quotes around the word great, but right along there with like the Gal Gadot, Imagine, tying it back to John Lennon, like the timing of this was just so perfect because it was released on, say it with me, Walker, April 17th, 2020.
Yeah. And when was the Imagine Gal Gadot Imagine video
probably same time.
Was released. No, because that was released, Zach. What is so funny about that is you think of it as like it was so embarrassing that you think surely that must have been after we had been in quarantine for a long time and realized
it was like a week.
No, it was like a week in and they were like, you know what the world needs? So this was released after the Gal Gadot Imagine video, but before the video where all the celebrities responded to the George Floyd protests by saying all the times they were racist.
Well, I remember it was like Sarah Paulson was like getting really, and I mean, everyone was saying stuff that I didn't realize it was them saying all the times they were racist. I thought it was them just condemning racism.
It was, but it also was kind of like listing a lot of things like that joke we told that wasn't actually funny that time that we, like it was like, which is good. It's good for white people to be honest and self-reflective about the ways that we all, and I do mean we all, engage in racism, casual or not so casual, structural or personal. But it was just kind of like, guys, like some of it was like, you don't have to tell us this.
Sarah Paulson, who's somebody I love and hate for some reason. Like, I know she's really talented, but sometimes she really bothers me, and I don't know why. And I don't.
Well, she plays a lot of. I think she plays a lot of kind of like bad characters. Yeah, unlikable.
Like, she's a brilliant actress. Sometimes something about her delivery will rub me the wrong way, and I don't know what it is. And I'm probably sexist, and I should probably die. But she, but no, she's brilliant. But in that video, though, she says something that I really agree with. She's like, "Going to sleep in your own home should not be a crime," and it's just like, yeah, I know, Sarah. Thank you.
Well, that video never like I thought. Sarah. Anytime somebody ever says something bad about directors, again, just play them the video of all these self-taped actors doing the, like, we're sorry for racism video, because I was like, never have more people needed a helping hand there to say, give me less on this take, because really good actors, because the one I will never forget.
Where are you going with this?
Oh my God. I was just like, oh wow. Like these
Aaron
actors.
Paul, dial it down.
Dial it down. There was
Sarah
like
Paul said, dial it down. Yeah.
Yes, because I feel like the purpose of that video was not only it's like not only to say like we are in solidarity with the people protesting racism and, you know, police brutality specifically and racism in America broadly. It was also to go, we are showing you how bad we feel about it, so maybe don't be too mad at us. It was also the purpose of that video. But yeah, Aaron Paul like puts his hand, I mean, people can't see what I'm doing, but he like is like rubbing his face. Yeah, anguish, like, I just can't take this racism anymore. And then he goes, and we need to prosecute these killer cops. They are murderers. And it was like, again, never have I seen a video of people saying things I agree with so strongly, making me go like, I want to distance myself from this.
So
between those two videos, out comes Fetch the Bolt Cutters.
Yeah. And it was released officially on April 17th, 2020. So literally a month and 4 days within, you know, pending on when your job adjourned, if your job was something that you were able to then work from home from, or, you know, restrictions were put in place or whatever. Everybody was impacted regardless what the outcome was during this period. So kind of just moving off of that for a second, the recording dates are July 2015 up through March 2020. The March 2020 is just final mix and edit. The recording locations are Fiona Apple's home in Los Angeles, her home in Sonic Ranch, which is in Tornillo, Texas, and then the Way Station, which is in Los Angeles, California. This one is a little bit of a longer album. It's 51 minutes and 49 seconds. So I think right up there with Extraordinary Machine in terms of its length. The label, it was released like her other previous 4 records, is Epic and Clean Slate Records. And then the producers, this is the very interesting part, one of many interesting things. There are 4 producers listed in this album. First and foremost will be Fiona Apple. Amy Eileen Wood is the second listed producer. Sebastian Steinberg is the third. And David Garza is the fourth. Now, David Garza was listed as a producer, I believe, on her previous album, correct?
I thought it was just her and Charlie Drayton on the last album.
Yeah, you're right. I'm mixing him up. I'm sorry.
But Zach, who are these names that you're listing? What do they all have in common?
I'm not sure. Why don't you tell me?
This is the band. These are the players on this album.
Yes.
This album is totally produced by the, Fiona Apple and her band, which makes it distinct from the other. Well, I guess not completely indistinct from the last one. The last one is produced. But I guess it's continuing with what she started on the last one these are not outside producers. These are the players on the album, which to me makes me feel like what this actually is a Fiona-led collaboration, and we're getting kind of as close to in the room as we can with these productions.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so cool that she gives everyone a producer credit. And as we talk about sort of like the history and conception, the recording process, we'll talk more about that. But there's not really a better way to sort of cap that off, is there? It's just really cool and really unconventional. So just to kind of talk about the like background and history and conception, I would just like to say I read quite a few different interviews with Fiona from various publications, and they all sort of seem to underscore the same thing. Not that she doesn't give a unique different answer each time or the questions aren't, but what I sort of noticed as a consistency is, there's a natural tendency to go, talk about, okay, well, from the last album, which was in 2012, so we're talking an 8-year gap, to this one, like what really took place? Because for most artists, it's a 3 to 4 year span, very generally speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, she toured the album, The Idler Wheel. So in 2012, after releasing that album, she immediately began conceptualizing a new album. And she considered a concept album initially based on her home in Venice Beach or in the Pando in Utah. But in February of 2015, she began rehearsals for this album, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, with band members Sebastian Steinberg, Amy Eileen Wood, and David Garza. And they began writing and rehearsing in Apple's Venice Beach home studio using homemade percussive objects and chanting as they marched around the house. Now, there's a lot more on that, but I do just want to point out that sounds very artsy and, kind of annoying or a little silly or whatever. But some of the best albums that I'm aware of have not done this process exactly, but a very, very, very specific album. Because a big through line that you're going to notice that I would like you to jump in on, Walker, maybe when we're talking about the recording process, if you won't mind, is that this album is percussively driven. Mm-hmm. And you could point that out based on listening to it many, many times or reading about it or whatever. But it doesn't start that way per se in my mind. It starts with like a little bit more of a traditional Fiona Apple, albeit very advanced piano-driven kind of structure. Mm-hmm. And then you really start to feel that percussive nature. And an album that I love that doesn't strike me as much this way in terms of its percussive experimentation is Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. So Pink Floyd had many albums before Dark Side of the Moon, which was their birth into the mainstream and is one of the most well-known and best-selling albums of all time ever. So they were very dejected and just very confused as far as what they wanted to do. And there's a literal quote, and I don't have it pulled up in my notes right here, but even just what I just said of like banging on pots and pans, that is what the initial sessions of Wish You Were Here, the follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon, that Pink Floyd were doing, just to kind of generate ideas. And the reason why I'm citing that is I think that something very instrumental and something very stripped down and something very elementary can often lead to something more advanced. What's interesting to compare the two of those is I think that you get a very guitar-driven, sonically experimental album in Wish You Were Here, whereas in this album I feel like it sort of stays contained even though it's brilliant. Anyways, I'd like to pass it over to you. I just kind of wanted to point that little minute similarity out.
Yeah, I think the chanting and the percussive nature of it, I do think it comes through in what just feels like a very immediate and almost like indulgently primitive type of approach to this music. I mean, I know everybody in the band gets a producer credit, but at least in some of the articles I was reading in that great New Yorker piece by Emily Nussbaum that came out around the release of the album, she was doing a lot of mixes with the drummer Amy Eileen Wood. So I think that she might have been one of the more involved members in actually like choosing takes and kind of building the final mixes. And it's worth noting too that article is the writer Emily Nussbaum is interviewing Fiona in March of 2020. So they're also still messing around with the album. And the article describes, Maud, her sister, coming over and throwing a harmony on stuff. And so they're still like tracking the album. So I love that this one didn't sit, even though the initial sessions began in, what did you say? Like pretty much right after touring Idler Wheel.
2015. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So even though the initial sessions began a long time ago, I do feel like it's cool that this one feels like the transition from what was recorded to what we're hearing. I like that it didn't sit around for a long time, because it just feels like that kind of album for me. It feels very of its moment in a great way. And I think that the whole like building it around rhythms, it's cool. I think that this approach is hinted at on Idler Wheel. Weirdly, Zach, I also feel like this album, strangely to me, out of all her albums, this one feels the most like a bit of a sample platter of what Fiona has done. It feels like the most like a retrospective to me out of any of the albums, which is not that it's not its own thing. I don't think it's a repeat. I don't think it's a repeat of an album she's done before, but almost every song to me feels kind of like, oh, she's doing this kind of song that she did on this album in a great way. In a great way. We talked an episode or two ago a lot about bands and artists moving into that stage of their career of comfortability with what they do.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't think there's like an excitement and a freshness to this approach. It is different, but I almost feel like it's a stripped down. As you said, this is a home recording. Fiona started with long, like 7 or 8, 10-minute takes of her just drumming on shit, which she takes all the way back to a childhood habit of constantly drumming, constantly walking to a beat. That's referenced lyrically on this album, on the song Shamika. So that is different. That isn't how she recorded the other albums. The other albums were songs already complete and then arranged in the studio with a collaborator. These ones seem to be more built from the ground up. And so I do think that reflects on the album. I do think there is a difference in the sound. And the bedroom recording of it all, I think, also creates a difference in the sound. I think this album is much more playful than everything else she's done and has like a humor to it, even though it's still addressing some of the same tough subject matters that her other albums do. But in terms of its style and songwriting and ultimate execution, there is a lot of the previous 4 on it. And I really like that. And I don't know if that was a conscious choice. If it was, it's not one I've heard her address in what I've read about this album. But yeah, do you get that at all? Do you feel like this is a little bit, it feels almost like, even though it's totally new, it feels a little bit like a best of to me?
Yeah, I do. And I think that normally that could be a way to ding something, but I really do. And I don't know that I put it into words that way, but every time that I've listened to it, which I will just go ahead and say right now, this is the Fiona Apple album I've listened to the most in my life.
Okay.
But just in preparing for this episode, which it had been a while, maybe, I don't know, 3-4 months since I'd sat down and listened to it all the way through. Just with the other 4 albums so fresh in my mind, there is just such a natural human tendency, I think, to call back to what you know. And it's not that I hadn't listened to the other Fiona Apple albums when I fell in love with this album initially before, but as I've stated, like, this album was such a big deal for me for over a year that it really it's not that it caused a complete rediscovery or anything like that, but it just led me to restart that path. And I hadn't ever really gotten that vibe that you were talking about before, about like, oh, it's kind of calling back. And what I think is cool is that it doesn't, it kind of in the same way Amnesiac by Radiohead feels like a little bit of a callback to Kid A in some ways, but it doesn't really feel like a callback to OK Computer. I think this one, yeah, you can kind of go over the map of her catalog, as you said, and like hear like, not in terms of sequences or arrangements or anything like that, but I do get what you're saying. And I think it's really, really fun because in something like Extraordinary Machine, where it's a little bit of a mixed bag for me, I feel like where she does call back, it's to some of the funnest parts, especially on the first few tracks.
I totally agree with that. And I don't want to say which songs and which song I think it's referencing. But one thing I think is really interesting on this is I actually feel like there was an approach to one song on her last album, The Idler Wheel, that is like, seems to have really unlocked something. And there are multiple songs that are like, oh, we're going to do that now with like a good chunk of the songs on this album. So
cool.
I think it's cool the way like these last two albums seem to really feed off of each other in terms of like, there's with the Idler Wheel, we talked about like what a just like spirit of kind of like in the moment discovery there seems to be on this album. And then I think there's these little pockets of like a moment or two on the Idler Wheel that it almost feels like grew their own tree. And now it's like, we're going to do that for a whole album. Because the thing about this album is it has what you would, you know, what you could technically call mistakes on the album. It's yeah, there's dogs barking in the background. There's her
I
going,
love that moment so much.
There's her messing up a lyric and then going fuck shit on the track. There's you know, there's moments of there's improvised lyrics in at least one spot that I know of on the album. And it's just so, I feel like it's so great to, you know, kind of grow up with an artist and you know, if they're not good at what they're doing, then having something that is more improvisational and less rigorously rehearsed, well, that would suck. But in this case, Fiona Apple is awesome, and it still feels carefully put together. It still feels labored over, but it's great. I don't know. This might sound a little corny. It's great to feel like she's having some fun. It seems that making records is a really painful process for her. And that could have been the case to some extent with this one, but it's nice that this one seems a little more effortless and a little less laden with the kind of like metaphorical childbirth pains of like getting this thing out into the world.
I think that's such a great point, too, because as we're going to talk about here in the next section, kind of talking about the album title and some of the themes, which I know that we'll want to get to in greater depth when we're listening to the songs with our guest to hear what he or she or they have to say about the album. We'll keep it a surprise for now. But I do just want to kind of just encapsulate or recap, whatever the right word is, some of what Walker is speaking to. In terms of the recording, Fiona and crew recorded long takes consisting of instruments being hit against surfaces and objects. Her vocals were unedited, and the album developed a highly percussive sound. The sessions at Apple's home were largely recorded with GarageBand. This is a really crucial point. On the long unedited takes, Apple commented, "I didn't even know how to edit it and make a take shorter, so each track is just this one long take, and if I made a mistake in it, well, I better just play over it and let that mistake work itself into it." This resulted in what Apple described as percussion orchestras, especially on songs like Newspaper and the title track. By July 2019, Apple had begun mixing the album. In September of 2019, the process began to slow down, with Apple developing doubts about the album. At this time, the artist first mentioned work on her new project in an interview with Vulture. This is when I remember hearing about it, was right towards the end of 2019. Explaining that she was still working hard on her next album, which should have been released a million years ago, and was hoping to put it out in 2020. She also admitted to being reclusive due to ongoing recording sessions at her Venice beach house. And then I was hoping to move into the album title, but Walker, did you have anything you wanted to add, any of that?
Well, this doesn't necessarily convey any new information, but just I thought there was a really nice paragraph kind of describing where the room in her house where the bulk of this recording took place from that Emily Nussbaum piece. So I thought I'd just read that just because I think it's a very, just a very evocative. Emily Nussbaum's a really great writer. So and also I should just a little correction. I incorrectly referred to her sister as Maud earlier. That's actually her mother's name. Her sister is Amber. So at the point that Emily Nussbaum is interviewing Fiona, Amber's coming over to do some harmonies that day. And she's describing the home recording studio. So after a while, Fiona, she and Amber went into a small room, Apple's former bedroom, where for years she had slept on a futon with Janet. That is her departed dog. After the dog died, she'd found herself unable to fall asleep there and had turned the room into a recording studio, although it looked nothing like one. It was cluttered with one small window and no soundproofing. There was a beat-up wooden desk and a computer on which Apple recorded tracks using GarageBand. There was a mic stand and a Day of the Dead painting of a smiling female skeleton holding a skeleton dog. Every surface, from the shelves to the floor, was covered with a mulch of battered percussion instruments, bells, wooden blocks, drums, metal squares. And that's it. I mean, I just love like that, that there is no really mind paid to technical aspects of this recording. And this album sounds really different because of it. I do think there is like a tinniness to the production that actually kind of serves it. The only other thing I wanted to say, and it just serves it because the album is very spirited and very fun, and I think these songs might have lost a little something had they gone through additional production. The album still sounds great in my opinion. It just there's a smallness to the sound that I really like. And again, I feel like Idler Wheel was a perfect preview of this. It kind of if this had followed Extraordinary Machine, I think it still would have been great, but it would have maybe been a little jarring. And I think Idler Wheel was a really nice kind of deconstruction of her sound. And
songs like Periphery, for instance.
Totally. But that album has a little more of an acoustic sound to me than this does. Because I don't know what all the instrumentation is in any given song, but there are certain songs where I'm like, oh, I think that this is the main melody maybe is being played on a piano, but it's being put through some GarageBand effects, and things just sound, there's a nice kind of distortion to this album that I think comes from the maybe lack of technical acumen behind the control board and more just finding things. Oh, what does this sound like? What does that sound like? Well, this is the way the room sounds. I mean, she referred to wanting her house to be an instrument on this album. And the only other thing I wanted to say is I think that even the cover of this album, I think very much gives this kind of attitude also. I'm pretty convinced that the photo of her that we see on the cover is probably a selfie taken on her phone. It looks like an angle that you would only take of yourself. It's a goofy picture. She looks like she's kind of making a funny face. Yeah. And so the whole thing just has a really wonderfully lo-fi and kind of low pretension attitude to it.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, why don't and feel free to either tag onto that anything you wanted or move us into discussing the title itself.
Well, just I just love the are you a fan of Consequence? Are you a fan of Consequence of Sound at all?
I don't read it specifically, but I've read good articles.
Yeah,
that are Consequence
I really
of Sound
like
before.
their article.
I think I follow them on Twitter, so I get a lot of music news from them. So I guess yes, I am.
Twitter? You mean True Social?
I'm sorry. I did not mean to dead name X, the company of somebody who does not believe in the concept of dead naming or pronouns.
Free speech.
Yeah.
Or free speech for a select few, I guess.
Free speech unless you're making fun of him.
At any rate, I'm not going to read their whole article, but listeners, I would really, really encourage you to read the Consequence of Sound article regarding Fetch the Bolt Cutters. It is by Irene I had such a hard time, and I even prepared Monokendilos. But just a fantastic article from April 17th, 2020. And I just want to read her 2 paragraphs at the very end, the bad and then the verdict, because at first I kind of bristled at her verdict on it, but I don't know that I really disagree actually. So she says, so she's a huge fan of the album, I will just say. But at the end she says the bad. In both lyrics and in sound, the record demands repeat passes and is bound to be polarizing for those looking for something pop perfect and full of convention. I agree, Irene. Great, well said. For the uninitiated and uncommitted alike, Apple's homegrown percussion could feel overwhelming and anxiety-inducing. I also agree with that. What do you expect from an album featuring drum lines tapped out on the box containing her dead dog's bones? So Walker kind of spoke to that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then she said,
and I think she also plays her dog's skull as a percussion instrument at points on this album.
The verdict. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is not an easy listen. Yet, for those willing to give it the attention it deserves, Bolt Cutters delivers a much-needed auditory exercise for the sequestered masses and surely one of the best albums to grace us in 2020. 8 long years later, Fiona Apple proves her return was worth every second in waiting. And I just love that because when she starts off with let's not sugarcoat it, it's not an easy listen, I kind of bristled, but then I'm like, but it's not. I mean, why else would I have listened to it besides the fact that I loved it and it was good and it was new and it was fresh and it was exciting and it was not what I expected and blah, 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 blah. I think it's because it's not an initially easy listen, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have hooks. That doesn't mean that it's not good. That doesn't mean that it's not clever. It doesn't mean that it's not melodically interesting. But when I've shown people this album, which have not been many, but like some of the feedback I've gotten is, wow, this is really artsy or something, or I could see why you'd like it. And I think that that's really actually complimentary if somebody says that, because they're like, oh, I listened to this and it was like very Zach music. That means that they have like, well, I interpret that to mean that like maybe they have a higher expectation of what I would find interesting, but it is an album I think to get to know, right? Just like Fiona herself, which we don't know, but just like that, where it's like, oh, this is different kind of energy. It's not harmful. It's not negative, but it's different and it's free and it's like new and lived in. And I really just liked that a lot. And I don't mean to be so dramatic with what I'm saying, but I really, really did like that.
I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, I agree with that. I think this album is a grower. I think that I'm still processing Fetch the Bolt Cutters.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't a negative thing, but it's just like, it doesn't maybe sit as comfortably in her catalog as other stuff for me. I kind of like, whenever I put it on, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, this song. Okay, what's going on with this song? And like, I'm kind of still processing the music in real time as I hear it. There are ones that jump out to me as like, oh, I'm really latched onto this or I'm really latched onto that. But then there are songs that I'm still kind of figuring out how I feel about them. I also, I would not really call this a cohesive album either. Mm-mm. I would say where with that kind of maybe was a bit of a knock on Extraordinary Machine. I wouldn't really call it a knock on this album. I would call it strangely maybe a strength of this album, because I do think that it does have a sonic through line with the percussion. And you know what we also haven't mentioned, Zach, is I think her vocal approach is very different on this album. There is way more vocal harmony on this album than I think any album. She's layering her voice and doing way more counter melodies with herself on this album. I don't think
I love.
It's really cool. And she described wanting to use her voice as more of an instrument.
I mean,
I think what she's doing on this album, I think that like she's almost handicapping herself a little bit by kind of not filling the space with the piano.
Which is an interesting choice because she does it on the first few tracks more than she does like the rest of the album, which is interesting.
I agree. I Want You to Love Me. And again, which is why I feel like there's we kind of get a tour through the different songs that she has done over her career here. And the opening track, I Want You to Love Me, I think is I think sounds like an Extraordinary Machine song in terms of like her playing and stuff. And Shamika kind of too. I guess I should probably hold off on, because we're not listening to the songs. These will probably be more interesting things to talk about when we're listening. But yes, I agree with you. It starts out very lush and full piano playing. But in general, that's really not what she's doing. And again, I don't know if it was a conscious choice or not, but it's almost like, it almost feels like this album is like her pretending that she's not as extraordinary of a piano player as she is, and going, well, instead I'm going to fill this with drums and vocals. And that's really, really interesting. Or more minimal sounds that I'm playing on a synth or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really interesting. I feel like I kind of lost track of the cohesion of the album. Despite that, I do think there is like a real strong sonic through line with the sound of the album because of the home recording and the percussion that persists throughout the whole album. But in terms of the songs themselves, it does feel like these songs don't necessarily easily fit together in my mind in a kind of album sense. They feel a little more to me like a collection of songs that she's written over the 8 years that have elapsed. But because of the way this album is presented, and because of course, she couldn't know there was going to be a pandemic, but also because she dropped it on us during the pandemic, that feels, whereas it feels like it kind of is a weakness of Extraordinary Machine, it feels like a strength of Fetch the Bolt Cutters to me, of just like this almost, I keep interrupting myself, but it almost feels like this is as close to getting to see Fiona Apple live at this time as you're going to get. Her last public appearance was in 2019. So it's not because of the pandemic. It's because Fiona Apple doesn't play live a lot anymore. She hasn't toured in years. We don't know if she will again. She hasn't played at Largo in a long time. And so,
and I think before 2019, 2017 was her previous live. So it had been a while.
It was 2018, and then it was 2017 before that. Like the performances are getting farther and farther apart. There hasn't been a tour in many years. And I guess all I'm trying to say in my very all over the place way is Fiona dumping what feels more like a collection of what she's been up to than here is a pristine, packaged selection of songs curated to sound like an album, feels appropriate and right to me in this case.
No, I think that's really, really well said. And I love the point you made about what it would be like to see her live, and sort of the chaotic nature of the chaos of the sonic nature of the album is what's really interesting to me, that you were also honing in on. Because I do feel like for the first 2 to 3 tracks, you kind of get a vibe, and then it's not like it shifts gears so abruptly that you're like, who is this? Like, is James Hetfield singing? But, a lot of the influences that she has called upon or cited, or that, critics have noted that the similarities are ones that people have talked about before. Tom Waits, for instance, right? Who was the female artist that came into everybody's purview because of Stranger Things recently?
Kate Bush.
Yeah. So there are
she lyrically references that song on
she lyrically
the
references
title track.
Kate Bush. Yeah. But
so speaking of title track,
just for the sake of time, let's talk a little bit about the album title. And
Zach, we already did an episode about the album title.
10 episodes ago.
Listeners, that's a little bit of Fiona Apple humor.
The title, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, is a quote from the British-Irish crime drama television series The Fall, where the protagonist, a sex crimes investigator portrayed by, pause for applause, Gillian Anderson. Love of my life.
Oh, okay. I didn't know this about you.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Scully. Oh my gosh, come on.
Yeah.
Where portrayed by Gillian
great.
Anderson recites the phrase while investigating a crime scene where a woman was tortured. Have you seen The Fall, by the way?
I have not.
It's good. Upon the album's release, Anderson acknowledged the title by sharing an animated GIF or GIF
GIF.
GIF of the scene via
Choosy
Twitter.
moms, choose GIF.
The quote reflects the album's exploration of becoming free, with Apple summarizing the title's message as "Fetch your tool of liberation, set yourself free." Now, of course, I want to hear from my co-host on this one, but you've hinted at several times, Walker, that there is, and Apple herself has, that there's a humor to this album. There's a lightness to it, right? Like there's some playfulness, and I think that's really interesting on such a relevant and like heavy kind of thematic quality, that you do hear some of this playfulness and some of this. I mean, one of the things that she talked about is she talked about her relationships with other women, and sort of the this is making it, using my own words, but like backbiting that can occur, you know, and I think this is an assumption that a lot of us make that hopefully we're getting better at, but like you sort of assume cohesion within a group that can be marginalized or something like that, you know, like, oh, all girls get along because well, no, of course they don't, you know, or whatever. Do you kind of know what I'm saying? And I like that she's speaking to sort of as a person that was, in her words, really bullied and mistreated by girls growing up. The humor is like dark, like it always is in Fiona Apple album, but I love that the album has this like this sort of light, not on all of it, but for such a heavy concept that is spoken about a lot in TV and film and art in general. I just really like that. I would love to hear you speak on it before I give my take on the album title, separate from everything we just talked about. Do you have any thoughts on what I just talked about?
Yeah, I have thoughts on what you just talked about. I don't think I have a take on the album title beyond what she has expressed it means in her own words. I think it's very indicative. It's perfect for what the album is, because it's what you just said. It's a kind of funny album. It's funny that it's like, again, like John Lennon, who she claims is a big influence. I think it's kind of doing that thing where a phrase gets stuck in your head like a little earworm, and then you just go, okay, that's a song now. It's funny that it's just taken from a TV show she was watching, but that the content and context is really grisly, right? Fetch the bolt cutters. I haven't seen the aforementioned scene, but if it's a torture scene or whatever, and you need to get bolt cutters, something very disturbing is taking place, right? And I just think that it's very in line with the sound of the album. I think that the humor that I refer to, I think I also use the word playfulness. It's not like a jokiness so much as it's the comfort of, I feel like each album has a stronger sense of self than the last one. And that's not something that was ever missing from her music. But this album still deals with relationships with men, but it feels less preoccupied to me with the men themselves and much more about it just feels like it's from a stronger sense of self. And you talked about it dealing more with women. I don't think that women have really been much of a subject matter on Fiona's records up to this point. Like, a lot of the songs seem to be addressed to the self. And so like, femininity, I can never say the word femininity. Femininity. Did I get it?
Yeah, there you go. You got it. Yeah. Walker Eminem Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. Womanhood is addressed when addressing the self, and I think that has strongly informed the perspective of a lot of the songs. But, a lot of Fiona Apple songs do seem to be addressed to or about men or a specific man. And I think that still comes up on this album, but there is a theme of kind of finding solidarity with other women, because not only did she talk about feeling bullied by other women, but she also talked about the climate around her making her see other women, probably in her industry or whatever, as competition. Like, I think there's a quote somewhere about, some of these songs are about identifying with instead of feeling competition with the women around me. And I think that's a cool. So, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, it seems to also be about unshackling oneself from your own kind of biases and hangups about the people around you too. But yeah,
I think that's beautifully said.
I'd love to hear. Freeing yourself from like notions that are not serving you. And what's your take on that?
And that is, well, before I get into my take, which is going to sound like I'm trying to be funny, but I actually think there's merit to. But that is such a universal concept, and that's what I think is Fiona has always been so great, and that is a concept you and I have honed in on again and again and again and again. Is that with Fiona and with Tom York or Peter Gabriel or just artists that we love, John Lennon, whatever, is that you can make it super specific, and in a case like this, it is very specific. I've not been. Thank God, knock wood. I've never been a part of an abusive relationship where, it's required that I metaphorically or figuratively do something like this. But freeing yourself of the shackles of an idea of whatever is something that is very, very hard to do, and something that I think that we can all relate to. And that's the beauty of great art, or something like music or whatever, is it helping to set you free through inspiration. Right now, go ahead.
Oh, I love what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, I just was going to tag it with, it's really cool because Fiona Apple, to me, the way she has, because I almost want to backpedal slightly, and just because if this is your first episode, saying that her songs have been really preoccupied with men, I don't mean that to sound reductive, because
no,
what I mean is, I think it is really cool that 5 albums in her 40s, that she's still exploring these topics from new angles, and I think deconstructing internalized misogyny on this album, both about herself and about other women. That's not the only theme on this album, but I do think it is something that is happening here, and I think that's really cool, because I think Fiona Apple has been a feminist icon from day one. From the world is bullshit thing on. Yeah. This has been somebody who has been attacked and blunt and saying things in a way that are not always easy to hear. And I think that continuing to do that, and continuing to do it in a way of like deconstructing her own beliefs and internalized ideas, it's just really cool. This is just like a person who at no point are the music and lyrics resting on their laurels and taking the easy way out, even though I do think this album is weirdly kind of more fun than all the other ones.
Well, that's the great irony about it, is that it does have like this like fun brightness to it, and humor as all her stuff has. But I brought up the sequelization to the 2015 film Mad Max Fury Road earlier. I hope we kept that, but there is a scene, listeners. I don't know if you've seen Mad Max Fury Road. Came out in 2015, the year that Fiona Apple started kicking around ideas for this album. I have not found this cited anywhere on Reddit by Fiona herself or by anyone in the speculative fanship community. There's a very key scene where Tom Hardy's character Max has Nicholas Holt's character Nux on his back, and they are chained together, and Charlize Theron and the 5 wives are all kind of washing up after their big chase, and Max gestures to one of the wives with his head. He says bolt cutters, and indicating fetch the bolt cutters.
Nice.
To free him from these shackles. And who attacks him? Charlize Theron's character. She beats the shit out of him. Yeah. And then eventually it ends up being a draw. And am I using a comedic vibe? The character who gesture. This is also crucial, actually, in that scene is he gestures at Abby Lee's character, one of the wives. She's one of the smaller in stature wives. Initially, it's going to be Charlize Theron's character, who's clearly the alpha of the group, clearly the biggest, clearly the most apt person to fight, even though she's missing an arm. And he says, no. I want her character's name is the Dag, played by Abby Lee, who's the shortest in stature. He says, no, she cuts them. And I just love it because Mad Max Fury Road, there's been a lot of hubbub made, I think, by people like myself who just love I think that is the greatest action movie ever made, and want to see an additional layer of femininity and feminine strength. And I will concede it is written by a man and all that, but there's a lot of effort made on that movie to make it more of a sensitive, ugly, just image of what the world could be like in a post-apocalyptic frame. There's a really convincing argument to be made that Charlize Theron's character is actually the main character and that it's her journey.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's a progressive film, is what I'm trying to say. And I do think that what Max's character is saying, even though he's missing part of the line, is fetch the bolt cutters.
Yeah. And, that's really funny.
Yeah. And I mean, watch that scene, listeners. Again, he gestures with his head. And he says, bolt cutters.
He says, fetch the bolt cutters. I've been in here too long. I want you to love me.
That's all. I just wanted to point that out. I was like, you know what? Maybe she doesn't even know it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I do think that line is as direct as fetch the bolt cutters from Gillian Anderson, her show. I love that. I have.
It wouldn't surprise me if Fiona is into that movie.
No, not at all.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't know that there's a ton more that I have to get into without us actually listening to the tracks, which we're going to do next week. But I mean, if we want to just like bullet point anything that we wanted to make sure to talk about.
I had one other thing. I mean, this album, kind of like all of her albums, we're getting into a little bit of the Radiohead territory where it's like the bad ones are like, this one is an A- or whatever, the bad ones, the ones that are thought of as lesser than. Fetch the Bolt Cutters was met with universal fucking acclaim. I do want to credit you, Walker. I remember reading, I want to say it was in December of 2019, reading a little bit about this forthcoming album and getting excited. But it kind of dropped off my radar for the following 3 months. And then when it came out, I remember you texting me being like, dude, have you listened to it? And me being like, oh no, shit, I want to listen to it. And just falling head over heels in love with this album. I love this album, and so did the critics. It was met with universal acclaim on the review aggregator Metacritic, which is my preferred sort of source for review aggregation. It has a 98 out of 100, so that's obviously universal acclaim. I wanted to cite this just for my co-host here. The album was awarded Pitchfork's first perfect score for a new album since Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in 2010. So certainly an artist you want to be paired to.
He's
West.
come up a lot in this season in relation to Fiona.
Jen Pelly, who's an author I absolutely love. She's come up several times throughout the season. She's an author critic, describing the album as unbound, a wild symphony of the everyday, an unyielding masterpiece. No music has ever sounded quite like it. I'm a really huge fan of author Jen Pelly. Listeners, please Google her writings on Fiona and just on music in general. She's so eloquent and just uniquely articulate. So there's a lot of other quotes from other publications, Rolling Stone, Los Angeles Times, I would encourage readers to listen to. But I did just kind of want to just quickly highlight that this album was a universal success in terms of its critical acclamation. It is her second highest selling album or best-selling album, in terms of like physical copies. And in this day and age, that's a huge, huge deal when you consider the breadth of time and how much the music industry has changed over the course of Fiona's career, mid-90s to now. And I've said it before, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Walker. To me, even though I really fell in love with Fiona Apple as an artist and just as an artist that I love and is somebody that I really admire and listen to so frequently, in 2012, prior to the release of The Other Wheel, but only slightly prior, that album came out in June. I think I started becoming obsessed with Fiona in about late 2011. So, you know, a decade plus she had been in rotation and somebody I was really excited about and loved to tell other people about. But maybe it was just pandemic shut in. Maybe it was the fact that I was just listening to this album literally nonstop throughout 2020. But this is the album where I think of her as the most present kind of in the zeitgeist. And I don't know. I would love to know what listeners think about that. If that's just, you know, when you become so into a thing and you're like, oh no, they're all over Reddit boards. There's articles being written about them. They're here, they're there. And it's like, no, they're the same they've always been, or you're just noticing it more. You know, I try to be conscious of that, but I really do feel like this refreshed her relevancy in a way that I had not seen before in the decade plus of my fanship. And I was really, really excited about that. And like the critical acclaim for this album, I'll just give a little preview just because we have a guest next episode. And we kind of did this last season when we had a guest for a Moonshaped Pool. We talked a little bit about our feelings ahead of time. I will just say, I love this album. And to me, it seemed like Fiona was a little bit more present in the mainstream than I had ever seen her before. So I'd love to pass it over to you, please.
I don't know. I don't really have a sense of that. I kind of think of the first two albums and Extraordinary Machine On as two different careers. And that might just be like, but I think that she kind of got her flowers, even though the first two albums were well reviewed and stuff. I think that it was after Extraordinary Machine and up to present day that people, her respect has just accumulated with each passing year. And that people don't write about her in the same condescending way. I'm not claiming that she doesn't still experience, you know, sexism in the industry or in the press or anything like that. But it just seems like it's like there is a better understanding and awareness of this is not somebody to be ogled and pitied and, you know, like, oh, what's she doing now? It's like, I feel like she has, with these last three albums, even whatever you think about the albums themselves, she has established herself as a important artist. You will get the albums when you get them. And there's not the same set of expectations of not just the timeline, but the content of that it's going to be a certain way. I think that people have figured out that this is not somebody who you can predict too easily. And so I really don't know. I mean, I kind of think that she is occupied, again, kind of like Radiohead. I think in one of our last episodes, you were talking about how we think of them as very alternative, but they're huge in the mainstream. That's kind of how I see Fiona Apple also. People know who she is. Like Radiohead, it amazes me still how much when Radiohead comes up, and I'm not an asshole to people about it, but when people go, oh, what music do you like? And I go, oh, my favorite band's probably Radiohead. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't really know anything other than, what's that song? Creep? Like that still happens all the time. And then I go, how dare you?
D'Artagnan, you.
How dare you talk that way to me, you? I think Fiona Apple, it's a similar thing where there are plenty of people who are like, oh, I've heard of her. Yeah, I know this one song, and it's usually something from Tidal. And then, but she has occupied a very important status in a more alternative space, even though she is a mainstream artist. So I kind of think as the delineating point where her career is her own is Extraordinary Machine On. So I can't say if she's bigger. All I know is with all three of those albums, each time I've been like, oh, everybody's talking about Fiona Apple again. I don't necessarily get the sense that.
But wait, Walker,
means...
just to interrupt you. Remember how on our Extraordinary Machine Part 3 episode, you said that in your mind, Extraordinary Machine was the thriller between you and your friend group?
Yeah.
That's kind of how this felt for me, where I'm just like, this is the album of 2020, and I can fully admit I may have had my blinders on, but that's just how it feels to me. That's all.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying with each of those three albums, it's just kind of like, in my world, she's huge again.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I don't know what that means in terms of impact, like if she actually gains a bunch of new fans each time. I'm really not sure. I just know that every time she puts something else out, it doesn't seem like her relevance has lost any.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I don't know really, like I feel like I would have a better sense of what her fan base is like now if it's more, the median age and things like that. If she were to play out live more. I want her to do whatever she needs to do. I obviously selfishly would really like the opportunity to see Fiona Apple in concert. One thing I will say about this album, and this is maybe where I'll kind of sign off and then let you add anything, that is, as we approach the end of this season, I feel that this album leaves us as Fiona Apple fans on a very hopeful note. This one does not seem to have with it the talk that the last few have of maybe I'm done. And, she even talks about a desire to possibly tour again, but on her own terms.
Yeah. I read about that too.
Yeah. And so this one seems to be something that she was really excited to make, really excited to put out in the world. And, time is very compressed for me in the post-pandemic world. 3 years ago that this came out feels like forever and no time, just because of the way things kind of operate now. But all that to say, it could be another decade or another. I could see her not coming out with something for a long time or maybe ever, or dropping something very surprising on us in a year, or deciding to go out there and play live again. It seems as if it's kind of all on the table. And what I love about her career is that she has earned, very deservedly so, the ability to do this stuff on her terms. I would love if her terms involved lots more albums and lots more live performances, but we'll just see. But I feel very hopeful as a fan. I feel like if I was a betting man, I'd say we're going to get another Fiona record before we get another Radiohead record.
Okay, that's what I was waiting to come up for. And don't you feel like, so listeners, at the time of this recording, so I don't have much to add either. I wholeheartedly agree on points A, B, and C. I would love to see Fiona Apple live. I would love to see her live with you and Nicole and Kai and I, or just you and I. I mean, just what a magical experience that would be.
Yeah, ladies, sit this one out. This one's between the boys and Fiona.
The way they were looking at Johnny Greenwood, I'm going to be looking up at Fiona. No, just kidding, listeners. That's a joke.
And we're going to be really broy about it too. Zach and I are going to paint our faces like it's a hockey game.
We'll put F and A on our chest, and then we'll turn around and shake our butts, and it'll be like rocks on our back.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I would love to see her live. I do feel hopeful. I hope that it's not such another long gap, because the pandemic did throw a wrench in it. But you know what? As you stated, and as she stated many times, she's going to do things on her own terms. I don't know if I'm more optimistic about Fiona Apple doing another record, because the old kind of gossip, who would have thought Phil Selway would be the gossip engine of Radiohead? He gave some other interview this week saying that things are shaping up for a new album yet. Did you see that?
No.
He put out something that he said things are starting to shape up to where we might do another album, and it's Phil again. So I'm just kind of I don't know, but just to table
that's probably just him trying to that's his way of trying to get back in touch with Tom and Johnny.
And by the way, here's my number.
Yeah. I don't know if you changed email addresses or something, but haven't been able to reach you.
No, I don't have much to add. I'm really, really excited to listen to these songs, Walker, with a guest. I love talking about kind of the conception and background. And listeners, I know this is a very, very important album to a lot of you. So I hope that, if there's anything we missed, that you can read it on your own. And and I just had such a great time kind of talking about such a wonderful period in this artist's career. And I'm really, really excited to jump on with the guests and listen to the tracks. But that's all I have to say.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We'll be back next week to go through the album, listen to it track for track. This has been really, really fun catching up, talking about this one with you. Listeners, don't despair. Few episodes left this season.
Mm-hmm.
I have been Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. And thanks for listening to